Greetings, friends. Welcome to CTUCC ConferenceCast for April 5th, 2012, the regular podcast of the Connecticut Conference of the United Church of Christ. Whoever you are, and wherever you may be on life's journey at this very moment, you are welcome here. We begin this week's ConferenceCast with this meditation from Ann and Tim Hughes, co-directors of Silver Lake Conference Center. Their text comes from Matthew's account of Jesus' passion, as he was tortured by Pilate's soldiers after his condemnation. They stripped him. They thrust thorns into his skin. They mocked and taunted him. They beat and whipped him, and then led him away to crucify him.
Jesus was bullied. In preparation for crucifixion, Jesus was stripped and humiliated and mocked with a scarlet robe and forced to wear a crown of thorns. Jesus was taunted first. He was ridiculed with mock worship, with name-calling, and then he was spat on. Some translations read, "When they had finished making fun of him, they took the robe off and put his own clothes back on him. Then they led him out to crucify him."
He wasn't only subjected to capital punishment in the name of Rome, he was ridiculed, taunted, physically and verbally harassed, stripped, assaulted, and bullied first.
What was the purpose of this humiliation ritual in justifying or preparing for the killing? Did the public group humiliation make it palatable for the crowd to distance themselves from the violence about to be done to an innocent man?
Considering the epidemic of bullying and harassment facing our youth today, as shown in the documentary film Bullied, which opened last week, I am struck by considering this human, all too prevalent aspect of the Passion.
The guards could have kidnapped Jesus in the garden and led him to a secret prison to kill him. Why the public taunting first?
Does it mean that we are prone by nature to humiliate our victims in public, to expose and render them other to the crowd, so that we may absolve our bystander consciences?
I am more haunted by our cultural knack for cultivating bystanders than I am by the bullies who torment their peers. We only breed public violence because there's an audience demand for it. These guards provoked their display in a context of fear because there was an acquiescing public audience of complicity.
Where are we now in the passion drama of our schools, on the digital and radio airwaves, in the courtrooms and on our streets? We are everywhere watching the ridicule, quietly listening to the surround sound of mob mentality that is bred of fear.
This Holy Week, let us recognize the purpose of the public. We are always in the public audience, always watching what happens right in front of us.
Here's a prayer for this week. Dear God, your Son Jesus was taunted.
Your child was bullied.
Thank you for gracing us with so many chances again and again to step out from the crowd.
Give us the courage we so desperately need, that we may hand you back your dignity, your clothes, your name, your humanity, whenever we see ridicule, taunting, harassment.
Give us the courage to say, enough.
Stop.
Let him be.
Let us be.
In the news this week, last night, by a 20-16 vote, Connecticut State Senate approved a bill that would end the death penalty in this state for crimes committed after it goes into effect. Advocates expect that it will be passed by the House of Representatives and signed by Governor Dannel P. Malloy. Interim Conference Minister, the Reverend Charles L. Wildman, said in a phone call this morning, "We give thanks for the vote that was taken in the Connecticut Senate to repeal the death penalty. This is a marvelous gift in Holy Week for the Christian community, a week in which we consider the meaning of life itself. The vote came after 10 hours of debate, during which Senator Gail Schlossberg, Democrat of Milford, said, "I want something better for our families. I want to know that in the face of terrible evil, we will hold on tighter to our humanity. That when our faith in each other is challenged, we will work harder to fulfill our obligations to one another as human beings. That we will stand for justice for all. That we will raise each other up and not descend to the level of criminals. We cannot confront darkness with darkness and expect to have light." Delegates to the Connecticut Conference have advocated for the end of capital punishment since 1973. Early in the morning on Maundy, Thursday, the day of shadows, we perceive a ray of light. Just 2 days before, a mighty cloud of witnesses followed a winding path through the city of Hartford, raising prayers in opposition to the death penalty. Organized by the Episcopal Diocese of Connecticut, most of the participants were Episcopal clergy, but they were also joined by other ecumenical leaders, including Interim Conference Minister Wildman, who had been invited to read Scripture at one stop. Following the traditional devotional pattern of the Stations of the Cross, which recalls the events between Jesus' condemnation and death, the marchers prayed, "Help me to see your image and likeness in the faces of all I encounter, even those I label, mock, and condemn." Also on Tuesday, healthcare advocates met at the Capitol with Lieutenant Governor Nancy Wyman and presented her with the "I Can't Wait for Healthcare" photo album. In each picture, a person holds a sign stating their reason why healthcare reform is imperative. Invited to add her own photo, the Lieutenant Governor immediately said yes, and promised to bring the album to the Sustanet Healthcare Cabinet and to the Health Insurance Exchange Board, both of which she chairs. Lieutenant Governor Wyman's card reads, "People need help now." Last Saturday, March 31st, citizens stood on a cold and rainy street corner in Hartford and later on the steps of the Capitol to call for justice for Trayvon Martin, the African-American teenager killed by a neighborhood watch captain in February in Sanford, Florida. George Zimmerman, the gunman, has claimed self-defense in the slaying of the unarmed youth. At the Capitol rally organized by students of the University of Connecticut School of Social Work, Faith Congregational Church UCC's pastor, the Reverend Stephen Camp, was among the speakers.
This nation needs to come to grips with its racism. It needs to come to grips with the fact that all ain't right. It needs to come to grips and understand that this cannot go on, that wearing a hoodie can't be something that is suspicious in our nation. It is time for us to come together for justice. Come together to understand that we have to be together and speak to these injustices as they happen in our country.
According to news reports, additional rallies were held last weekend in New Haven, Storrs, New London, and New Britain. A further rally, sponsored by Mothers Against Violence, will be held at 9:30 a.m. this coming Saturday, April 7th. Participants will march from Albany and Main Streets in the North End to the state capitol. On March 10th, 19 teenagers of the First Congregational Church UCC of Cheshire and their adult advisors fasted for 30 hours, getting a taste of what it's like for people less fortunate than they. From Friday's lunch to Saturday evening, they experienced some of what 325 million people experience every day. During the fast, they placed 917 crosses or stars of David on the church lawn, representing the 917 children who die every hour of hunger-related causes. For these stories and more, including a musical presentation of the story of the prodigal son, visit us at ctucc.org/news. Registration is open for summer conferences at Silver Lake, as well as for 3 retreat and work opportunities this spring. The Spring Women's Yoga and Music Retreat that starts April 13th, Spring Action Weekend starting April 27th, and a new men's retreat called On the Edge of Fire the weekend of May 4th. Learn more and register for these at silverlakect.org. Email, websites, and social networks oh my is the title for a day-long workshop on communication for churches to be held in New Britain on April 14th. Green Teams Unite gives local church environmental ministry leaders an opportunity to share stories and ideas in Middletown on April 21st. CT Women of the UCC hold their annual meeting on April 28th. In May, we have boundary training for authorized ministers on the 3rd, the Church Historians Workshop on the 5th, a still speaking presentation also on the 5th, and the New England Association of United Church Educators event, Welcoming the Living Stone, runs May 8th through 10th in Craigville, Massachusetts. The second annual Youth Revival will be in Hartford on May 11th, and the spring meeting of the Connecticut Conference, featuring keynote speaker Lillian Daniel, is May 12th in Suffield. Registration is open for that event at ctucc.org/annual meeting. Sign up now for the National Youth Event. This great gathering of youth ages 13 through 18 will be held July 10th through 14th at Purdue University. We have over 60 registered already. Sign up by May 7th to be on board one of the 2 bus trips to get young people to these 5 days of dynamic workshops, inspiring worship, hands-on service projects, and rockin' recreation and music. The service bus includes a stop in Cleveland, Ohio for a mission project and to tour the UCC's national offices. The express bus leaves a little later and goes straight to Purdue. You'll find more information at ctucc.org/NYE. And you can always learn more about what's coming up in the conference at ctucc.org/events. We end this Holy Week podcast with this additional reflection on the wonder of Easter Day. The most astonishing claim of the Christian Church is that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead, and that his new life makes all the difference in the world. Even the Gospel writers themselves were well aware of this tension. When the women who visited the tomb found it empty and returned telling of the words of angels who said to them that Jesus was alive, nobody believed them. In some ancient texts of the Gospel of Mark, which is the Easter text in the lectionary this year, the women are so frightened that they tell nobody at all. In 5 days, a small movement went from exultation of the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and then Jesus' success in debates with the religious authorities in the temple, to fear for their very lives, when betrayal erupted in their closest circle, and the government arrested, tried, and swiftly executed their beloved leader. For 2 days they hid. Any sensible person would have. Any sensible person would have crept discreetly away to try to rebuild his or her life away from the notice of the powers that be. They didn't. Instead, on the 3rd day, something changed, and they emerged. They said they'd seen the Lord. They said that he lived, and that because of this, God's relationship with all the world was made new. The quaking, frightened men and women emerged and took on the very powers that had slain Jesus and had shaken them to their core. They said he is risen indeed. Their confidence in what they'd seen and their courage because of what it meant to them led nearly all of them to further confrontations with those authorities, and those confrontations brought them to their graves. graves that they no longer feared. The Apostle Paul never knew Jesus before the crucifixion, and he bitterly persecuted his followers afterwards, until Paul too saw the risen Christ. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he wrote to the church in Corinth, he appeared also to me. And in that life, he firmly believed he saw the first fruits of resurrection for all humankind. So on this Easter Sunday, remember frightened men and women restored to courage. Remember broken men and women restored to wholeness. Remember a bitter persecutor of a man restored to what he was meant to be, a builder of faithful communities. And all this happened, remember, because the one who died now lives. May this Easter bring you God's rich blessings of courage, of healing, of renewal, and of hope. And that brings this ConferenceCast to a close. Thanks to Ann and Tim Hughes for their reflection, and to GarageBand for our music. Primary funding for ConferenceCast comes from your congregation's gifts to our church's wider mission, basic support, changing lives through the United Church of Christ. This is Eric Anderson, the Minister of Communications and Technology for the Connecticut Conference of the United Church of Christ, praying that your days this Holy Week and every week may be filled with the presence, the guidance, and the grace of God.